this topic, St. Patrick and how he helped save Western civilization, gosh, kind of a long topic. And if any of you were around about 150 years ago, if you weren't, but if you have books that old, it's kind of amazing when you look on the shelf how many of the book titles just were like a paragraph to describe what the contents of the book was. So thank you for being here today. I hope to be able to make that point on a little bit of historical perspective on who St. Patrick was and really how he did make a difference. As we get into this look at St. Patrick and then some things that have flowed out of his life, here's a couple of quotes that have challenged me recently, not from him, but just as I go into a talk like this, I want to leave a different person even as I give it and as you listen to it. It's not because things are different that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that things are difficult. Difficult's the word. We cannot become what we need to be by remaining where we are. Courage is the power to let go of the familiar. And so even as we take a look at St. Patrick's life, I want to take a closer look. I want to take a real close look and see what kind of difference St. Patrick made. Well, let's set the context a little bit. Taking a closer look. Where does St. Patrick fall in the whole course of human history? Well, if you take a look at some world history that surrounded his time in a 1-minute span, we first find that there are the Greeks that are showing up in the Greek Isle and the Greek Peninsula. And the unique thing about the Greeks is even though there's world history before the Greeks, they had a knack at really systematizing science, history, philosophy, and out of that systemization of those particular items, more culture developed, including the arts, drama, and culture. You know, I love to work over some certain words in my presentation, so you guys can help me along if I come along another one of those words that needs a little bit of a workout to get it out of my mouth. After the Greeks, which were about 600 to 400 BC as far as some of their heyday, the Roman Republic started in Rome, Italy as a small city-state. And it wasn't even a republic at 400 BC, but the beginning seeds of the Roman Republic began to fall into place. And the uniqueness that the Roman Republic brought to the world system is that they were people that began to self-govern themselves. No longer was it a king or a military leader battling one against another. In this unique society, they began to self-rule even more than in the preceding Greek democracies. And one of the things that the Romans did as it began to move toward becoming an empire is they really became a conduit for seeing Greek culture spread everywhere. And so you had Roman infrastructure of roads and philosophy and their own thinking, but they also picked up and amplified a lot of Greek thought until they came to the point that they began to decay. And interestingly enough, the Roman Empire began to decay when it became overly infatuated with sex, sports, and a welfare state. And I'll comment on that a little bit later, let you make your own observations about where you feel like our culture may be. But into this, St. Patrick's story unfolds. Who was St. Patrick? Well, St. Patrick was born in the England of Britain, or Saxon at the time. It wasn't known as England. He was born around 390 AD, and he was born to some parents whose father was a magistrate, and they had power and position within their particular realm. As a person of power, his father being a magistrate, they had control of lands. And so I just use this image here as maybe the peacefulness and the... At age 16, however, this abruptly ended. Barbarians, and the ring was a synthetic diamond. The excited young lass showed it to her father, was a jeweler. But into this, St. Patrick's story unfolds. Who was St. Patrick? Well, St. Patrick was born in the England of Britain, or Saxon at the time. It wasn't known as England. He was born around 390 AD, and he was born to some parents whose father was a magistrate, and they had power and position within their particular realm. As a person of power, his father being a magistrate, they had control of lands. And so I just use this image here as maybe the peacefulness and the luxury, at least in that era, that Patrick and his family would have had. At age 16, however, this abruptly ended. Barbarians, that's not scary enough. Barbarians came south, and they captured Patrick at age 16, and obviously this is a little bit of humor, but these guys were pretty tough. And this is actually a picture of a shrunken head, kind of that era. They would even take the heads of their captors, and so being captured into slavery was pretty tragic, but there was a worse destiny you could have. And Patrick was actually captured at age 16 and then taken over to Ireland, and then he was enslaved there, but his job as a slave in Ireland at that time was to be a sheep herder. Now, as he was herding sheep, and I don't know all the systems of control that these barbarian hordes had over the slaves they made, but it was difficult to escape. And as he tended sheep, in Patrick's experience, he had a personal encounter with God as he was out tending sheep. The person of Jesus Christ became real in his life, and he really began to be transformed. And so for those 6 years that he was tending sheep, from age 16 to 22, somehow there was a supernatural visitation in St. Patrick's life that changed him from the inside out. At age 22, he escaped and went back to his country of Britain. And it was there that once he returned, he began to have his heart stirred for the people of Ireland that he had just escaped from. And so the noble thing that St. Patrick did, and the reason that everyone raises a Guinness Stout, among other reasons in this day and age, is he actually had the gumption and the courage to go back on his own initiative to Ireland to see if he could get the message of God's love out to the Irish people and become a missionary there. As he did so, one of the reasons that the clover leaf becomes such a symbol of St. Patrick's Day is not only it's prevalent in Ireland, and it makes Ireland a very green area along with all the rain and the other foliage. The clover leaf became a teaching tool for him in the villages and towns that he went to. And it was a way for him to talk about the Trinity of God, God the Father, the Holy Spirit, and the Son. And so he would use the clover leaf to say, somehow, in the mysterious way that the clover leaf is one and yet three parts, God is in some way mysteriously one God, but three parts, or three personas. As he ministered to the people of Ireland, let me read this from a little brochure that I'll give you access to that I helped put together a lot of history from. This speaks of his courageousness. He courageously faced down pagan Druids, who were the people of that area that had previously captured him. They still practiced human sacrifice, but he stood steadfastly against these Irish warriors. They even hung their enemies' skulls from their belts as trophies. Into this bloodthirsty culture, St. Patrick brought the Christian message of love and forgiveness. It had remarkable results. Within his lifetime, the warriors cast aside their swords of battle, and a culture of war and illiteracy became a culture of peace and learning. Meanwhile, however, in Europe, something totally different was going on. There's an ancient historic book, and I can't remember the title, but the first line in this book is, in the year 406, the Rhine froze over. And what's significant about that is the Rhine River was a river that divided what was then the seat of power in the Roman Empire and the barbarian hordes of Europe of that era. And so when the Rhine froze over, it began in the year 406, just this wave after wave of invasion into civilized Rome and the sacking of libraries and institutions. What was originally a trickle of barbarian invasions into the Roman Empire became a flood. Rome had become a Christian empire by this time, but it was Christian in name only. Rome had no moral compass to direct it, and the barbarian hordes were bent on destroying it. In fact, by 495 AD, within a 90-year period, all the continental libraries had been destroyed, and Western civilization was about to be overrun, except for the fact that over in Ireland, there'd been hundreds, even thousands of previous barbarians that had been converted. And these Christian Irish monks began to copy books like crazy. they copied the Bible. They copied things from the Roman library, including Plato, Virgil, Cicero, and many other Western, what we now know as Western historical works. In fact, in a single generation, these former barbarians of Ireland learned Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, and even produced that beautiful calligraphy script that now is universally recognized as the script of the Middle Ages. So while Rome was collapsing, this remote outpost island west of Britain was literally capturing all of the history that was formerly housed in these Roman and Greek libraries. So, in that very real way, we look to what St. Patrick did from 390 to 460 AD when he died, and the reason March 17th is St. Patrick's Day, is that's the day that he actually passed away, and he was eulogized. But even those that he trained continued that process, even as the Roman Empire was collapsing and preserving those vestiges of Western civilization. So in fact, he did leave a legacy that's profound. Now this is where I want to transition a bit into what are the ramifications then for us today. Because whenever I take a look at one of these historical figures, I know this was just a little brief dalliance into him. 460 AD was a long time ago, and so there's a lot of sifting you have to do between legend and truth in that area. And so I hopefully in the last 8 minutes or so presented the core essence of what was there. I want to take a few minutes now to look at views of history. Take a look at how St. Patrick had a historical perspective, but then also how our views of history influence how we live our lives today. What I want to make here is a challenging supposition is this. Your view of history will determine your view of world and how you live your life. Let me read to you something from the Humanist Manifesto that was written around the turn of this last century in the 1900s. And this kind of sets the stage for rolling out several views of history that I want to explore in just a minute. And just listen to me, I'm quoting from their text with no judgment. You can make your own assessment of this. Humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. We find insufficient evidence for the belief in the existence of a supernatural. It's either meaningless or irrelevant to the question of survival and fulfillment of the human race. As non-theists, we begin with humans, not God, nature, not deity. Nature may indeed be broader and deeper than we now know. Any new discoveries, however, will be to enlarge our knowledge of the natural. But we can discover no divine purpose or providence for the human species. While there is much that we don't know, humans are responsible for what we are and will become. No deity will save us. We must save ourselves. Now, without comment on whether you kind of agree with that or find that kind of lacking, let me speak to a couple views of history that come out of that kind of perspective. And then as a group, we can contemplate a little bit of what value those views of history have. First view of history that comes out of that perspective is what I call the slinky view of history. And actually another way to describe it would be the circular view of history. The circular view of history simply says this, that history is just a process of repeating historical cycles with no ultimate purpose or goal. A guy named Marshall Foster wrote this about this particular view of history. The events of men that exist are in the seasons of a life cycle. All of life and culture is seen as just an endless repetition of living and repeating the rhythm of the universe. What happens is people become fatalists, caught in a meaningless circle of events leading nowhere. Under the influence of this cyclical view, the importance of individual achievement to better the world is lost in a fatalistic, all-powerful, universal cycle. Societies that adapt this historical view labor under the false perspective, and the people therefore have little motivation to exchange either a caste system or their economic poverty for something better. And so at its worst, it's like, well, what does it matter? All of life's just going to repeat itself anyway. And so that's one view when you remove the providential equation from history. Another view of history that comes out is random chance. Everything happens by chance without a purpose. And interestingly enough, this is one that in this century has been adapted widely. And it closely parallels some of Darwin's thinking as far as where humankind came from, and maybe also gives us a reason that Uncle Eddie actually looks a little bit familiar to us, based if we had this view of the world and Uncle Eddie at our family anniversary parties and things. Another view of history actually begins to unfold a little later in this century, and that is that we're just all in a class conflict. It's a Marxist view of history that says the class struggle is resulting in a perfect socialist state, and it's just a war amongst the classes, and one class has to win over the other. Lastly, the last worldview without kind of a God component in it, and the reason I want to bring this into the equation is because St. Patrick had that God component, is what I call the existential view of history. History is meaningless, and therefore there's no interest in it because what's past is past. Future is unpredictable. There's no hope in the future. And so what the moment of the day requires is that we just eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And as we all know, this is something that our culture has really wrestled with. We wrestle with the fact that, gosh, let's party today, because tomorrow, we don't know what tomorrow could hold, and really there's no meaning to our lives at all. And even if we don't think at this level on a normal, in a normal course of a day, we oftentimes by default live in this fashion. So, there's one last view that's unexplored at this point, and it's a linear view of history. It has a beginning point where good triumphs over evil over time, and that God's plan is unfolding in time and space. And this picture really strikes this image for me. I like art, and I like how pictures sometimes can carry us along in the theme. The reason I like this picture is for a couple of reasons. You know, there's a left and a right edge to it. But I see this jogger experiencing some beauty in the created order. Maybe the sun representing some kind of providential plan for our lives and for human beings here on earth. But I like the picture of the runner in this picture as well, as it represents this view of history, just because I see somebody running with passion, quite well I might add, with purpose. In fact, I can't remember the last time I had a stride like that, but really robustly experiencing life. And so I believe that it was St. Patrick's worldview that there was this linear or providential view of history that gave him the gumption to say, I don't know what will become of my life, but I'm going to courageously go back to where these people I feel like need help and elevation and see what I can do. And if it costs me my life, so be it. There's a greater purpose for me doing that. Now, some of us take the Price is Right approach to these worldviews. And we say, you know, Bob, I'm here on the stage, and I know I'm going to get some kind of prize behind each door. I'll take door number 3. And unfortunately, by default, our worldview is sometimes chosen for us. These are the ones that I have just placed here. And the linear worldview is the one that I personally tend to gravitate toward, and I personally see in individuals that are making a difference, a positive difference in society, tend to think of this linear or providential involvement. I want to give you an example that happened some 1,100 years later after St. Patrick. The Pilgrims who first came to America cultivated this worldview even as they lived in Holland. In 1620, they said this: they cherished a great hope of laying a good foundation for the propagation and advancement of the gospel, even though they should be but stepping stones, meaning that there'd be those that would follow them in this task. They went on to say that out of the small beginnings, greater things have grown by His hand who made all things out of nothing. And as one small candle may light 1,000, so the light enkindled here has shone to many, yea, in a sense, the whole nation. And so even 1,000 years later, there's these pilgrims getting on a ship with this view of history that it has meaning, they're coming with a purpose, and that they hope the purpose has a powerful result. Let me bring this up just a little bit closer to today's day and age, and then I'll bring it specifically to our culture. Even 200 years after this, in the 1828 dictionary that Noah Webster produced, the first one for the American Republic, he defined courage as this: bravery, that quality of mind which enables men to counter danger and difficulties with firmness, or without fear, or depression of spirit, valor, boldness, and resolution. And the interesting thing about this 1828 dictionary is about 30% of the words Noah Webster, who was a Christian, footnoted them with biblical examples of the words he was defining. And some of you may be familiar with this little phrase, be strong and courageous. I think of modern day courage, and these are probably some of the images that you think of as well. Firemen at 9/11. If you don't know the name Todd Beamer, he's one of the guys on the Pennsylvania Flight 93 that wrested controls from the terrorists, and they both gave their life. And so I think of them as these kind of individuals that live with courage. Another word that has kind of lost mileage in our culture today is the word virtue, meaning moral goodness, the fulfilling of moral duties, abstaining from vice, also a particular moral excellence. And as I look at this 1828 dictionary that I actually have a copy of, I wonder, what if these words were lived out with a passion in our day and age? What kind of influence would they yield in a person's life as a cultural preservative, but also a culture remaker, if we were to just capture these two words among the many that are in this dictionary? All right. Here we are, 2004, and some headlines just from the last couple of years that kind of maybe deflate our spirits a bit, but I want to end on a word of hope. And this is just a comment on the ethics meltdown that we had in the last couple of years. Phony earnings, inflated revenues, conflicted Wall Street analysts, directors, asleep at the switch. This is not just a few bad apples we're talking about here. This, my friends, is a systematic breakdown. Nearly every known check on corporate behavior, moral, regulatory, you name it, has fallen by the wayside. The current wave of business corruption is at least in part the consequence of some very bad ideas that dominate larger society. These are some headlines I won't go through, but it's an interesting exercise to go through. I collected all those headlines in one day, and they're pretty telling. This came out just 2 weeks ago. Shock jock Howard Stern even says this: there's a culture war going on. And a lot of times you hear that terminology from the religious right, but it was really interesting that here Howard Stern, which would probably be at the other end of the spectrum, is stating what's obvious as well. So, now we face up to the choices that we have as Rotarians and as people that want to make a difference in our world. We can put our head in the sand on these matters and just hope that it all goes away. We can even have a little fun doing it, as this guy has somehow, some way. And I'd like to know whose head actually is on that body and how they've got it underneath that sand. But, we can kind of just blow it off and say, gosh, who am I? How can I be responsible? As I've said already, the Roman culture collapsed on these three themes: a welfare state, a sports infatuation that included violence and blood, and sex, which included immorality that was just rampant, which in turn just made everything that seemed right was called wrong, and what was wrong was called right. Does this sound like any country you know of today, probably more than our own? And what will keep us from going to the same demise? And so that's kind of the question I want to leave us with. I want to show two last slides. I've got more than that, but this is the first time I've kind of actually put this assembly of slides together, and I want to say sense of our time. So I'm going to jump forward a couple, and I want to make one observation and a final challenge. First observation is this: we have got to discern the difference between two words or concepts. There's a need in our day and age for people that can make right judgments. There's not a need in our day and age to cop an attitude of judgmentalism. And what I mean by the difference in these two things is this: that judgmentalism is an attitude of arrogance and demeaning, that I've got it all right, I've got it all together, and you're wrong. However, because our society, the mantra is, don't judge me and I won't judge you, what we've gotten away from is our ability to make right judgments. being able to assess right from wrong is actually a sign of maturity. Judgmentalism, when it's foisted on people and it shuts us up, basically leaves a culture in a situation where culture suspends all judgments. I'm sorry, that's a little hard to see. There's a tolerance of all things, and tolerance actually becomes the new God, and we call bad ideas good. But when a people group commits themselves to making right judgments, respecting others, and calling bad ideas bad and good ideas good, it actually produces courageous leadership. And so my biggest concern right now as a society, are we having a leadership implosion, or are we having people step up to the plate and being courageous leaders? During the Revolutionary War period, writer Bentis says that there were really 6 world-class leaders that really helped us during that era. Our population in the U.S. right now is 3 million, or excuse me, at that time was 3 million. With that size, with the population today, we should produce 500 such leaders of that substance based on the difference in our population sizes. And so the lingering question that I want to leave us with is, where are the leaders? Will you be a courageous leader with a moral compass, knowing right from wrong and influencing where you're planted? And if not you, who? And so I started with St. Patrick, an individual that you can see just by one individual's action and a linear view of history and some gumption, goes back in a courageous fashion. The Pilgrims carry on that theme, and this St. Patrick's Day, I want to give you that same challenge as Rotarians. Will you be a St. Patrick-type leader? And if you are, I'll raise a Guinness Stout to you as well. Thank you very much.